Halfway through the AFC, it's time for me to talk about how the teams in the AFC South did in this 2013 NFL Draft. And let's start off with last year's division champ in the AFC South, the Houston Texans. I know I've been saying it for years, and I'm sure a lot of Houston Texan fans have been screaming this at the top of their lungs for years. When are you going to get a number 2 wide receiver? A legitimate compliment to Andre Johnson. And no, that's not Kevin effing Walter. Well, the Houston Texans in the 2013 draft finally found that man in Nuke, DeAndre Hopkins from Clemson. They got him with the 27th overall pick. So not only did they address what to me has been a gaping void on their football team and on their offense in particular for years with their first-round pick. Not only did they address that big need, their biggest need that they had, they got really good value with the pick, being able to get DeAndre Hopkins at pick number 27. They didn't have to reach for anybody. They didn't have to trade up for anybody. They were just able to stay put, and they got their guy. And that right there alone makes this a successful draft for the Houston Texans. That's just the way it is. This has been such a gaping void for so long. I was actually a little surprised that they didn't try and draft more wide receivers. I know they focused on the position with Martin and Posey in last year's draft, but you know, you can never have too many wide receivers, I guess is the best way I could say it. As far as the Texans draft overall, I like to pick a Swearinger in the second round, somebody that can learn from a great player like Ed Reed, a future Hall of Famer, and potentially grow into an impact safety. I think Brennan Williams at some point could potentially start at right tackle for the Texans. It may not be in 2013, but down the road I think he could. I really like the pick of Sam Montgomery at the end of the third round. Sure, he's a gamble because you're not sure once he gets some money if he's going to really play, if he's going to be focused, if he's going to want to achieve his full potential. But by God, if he does achieve his potential and he is a focused player and he wants to be what Sam Montgomery could be, he could be a hell of a pass-rushing outside linebacker in the 3-4. I also like, I think a sleeper pick for this team potentially is Quessenberry, the guard that they picked up in the 6th round from San Jose State. For some reason, I just really like him. It's somebody that jumps up as one of those late-round picks that I think could end up being a starter at some point in time for his team. The Texans, in general, did a solid job in this draft. This is a team that had some holes going into this offseason. They're a team that's close to being a real legit title contender and at times looked like it during the 2012 season, but we found out they had some areas of deficiency. Losing Glover Quinn on defense didn't help, but when you sign Ed Reed, you draft DJ Swearinger, you've definitely addressed that void that was left by his departure. And getting DeAndre Hopkins. Now you're looking at a team with Andre Johnson and DeAndre Hopkins and Keyshawn Martin, and when Posey comes back from his injury, Posey as well, you have a much better wide receiving core, the best wide receiving core the Texans have had in their organization's history. Definitely a lot more weapons for Matt Schaub to work with, putting the pressure on him to either put up or shut up. Overall, I gave the Texans a solid grade here on their draft of a B-. I was a huge fan of the Indianapolis Colts draft in 2012. Not only did they get their franchise quarterback to build around in Andrew Luck, I really liked the approach they took to the draft in general. They said, we're not going to sit here and try and balance out nothing. We got our quarterback. Now we're going to surround him with weapons and pieces and put him in the best possible situation to succeed. That's why the Colts had such a great draft in 2012. That's why the Colts made the playoffs in the 2012 season with a rookie quarterback. It's no real secret here. So this is a Colts team that had a great year. You know, they rode the momentum of Chuck Strong and all of this and all of that. Now, the reality of the situation is the Colts are still a team with a lot of holes, both on offense and in particular on the defensive side of the football. So it's not all that surprising to me that they decided to focus on the defense with their first-round pick. It's not a surprise to me. You're running a 3-4 defense that they focused on getting somebody that could play outside linebacker. My question for the Indianapolis Colts taking Bjorn Werner 24th overall is I really question whether or not he can actually be an effective outside edge rusher in the 3-4. I just don't see it fully. I really don't. To me, I compare his selection to being very similar to the Packers taking Nick Perry in last year's draft late in the first round. A good value as a player for where he's taken, but maybe not necessarily the best scheme fit. I could see Werner potentially being a bit of a bust because I'm not sure he will transition properly to 3-4 outside linebacker. Could be wrong, but I just wonder if there were better picks they could have made with pick number 24. I also question, you do have Reggie Wayne there, sure. You got T.Y. Hilton in the 3rd round last year, sure. But you really lack a future number 1 wide receiver and a real legit big physical number 2 wide receiver in the meantime. So maybe they should have been taking a DeAndre Hopkins or a Cordero Patterson or a Justin Hunter with this 24th overall pick. When you look at their philosophy through the rest of the draft, they focused on the trenches with their next 3 picks. I like the picks of Thornton and Holmes and Hughes. I think either Thornton or Holmes could end up being a starter on the interior of that offensive line in year 1. That was one big flaw of that Colts offense last year, was they didn't do a very good job of protecting Andrew Luck at all. That's why they signed Shirless in the offseason. And, when you look at this, this is a situation where these guys could come in and contribute, and you're helping out your franchise quarterback. That's a good thing. I also like the picks that they made in the 7th round. For some reason, I look at Kerwin Williams and Justice Cunningham, and I see 2 guys that could be solid role players that end up both making the roster. This was not an impressive draft by the Indianapolis Colts by any means, especially when you measure it compared to the great draft they had last year. I gave them a grade of C-. I also factored in that their 2nd round pick was used in a trade to get Vontae Davis, so they gave up a 2nd round pick to get a former 1st round pick, so that helped the grade out here a little bit. Not the most impressive draft, but I don't think this is a draft that ultimately is going to kill the organization either. In my humble opinion, in the 2012 season, even though they ended up with the 2nd overall pick, the worst team in all of football was the Jacksonville Jaguars. They had one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the entire league. They had one of the worst offenses in the entire league. They had one of the worst defenses in the entire league. But more importantly, more than anything else, it's an organization that lacked direction and to me also lacked an identity. And going into this draft, the Jaguars to me obviously had holes and needs all over the place. But not only did they need to address those holes and needs, I feel like they needed to find some type of identity, figure out what their organization is going to represent under head coach Gus Bradley. And after this draft, I've seen a lot of people praise the Jaguars and their draft. I'm not that big on this draft that they had. Taking Luke Joeckel number 2 overall. Some people have questioned why they would take a right tackle number 2 overall. Well, the fact of the matter is, Eugene Monroe, their current left tackle, his contract's up after 2013, and they may not feel like paying big-time franchise left tackle money to Eugene Monroe. Hence, that's why they drafted Joeckel. He plays the right side in 2013, and maybe takes over in 2014 on the left side and becomes whoever the long-term quarterback is in Jacksonville, their blindside protector for the next decade. Was Joeckel the right pick? It's kind of one of those things. There weren't really any quarterbacks that were worth the 2nd overall pick on the board, and nobody was really dying to trade up into that spot, it looks like, because nobody ended up doing it. So they were kind of forced. They kind of had their hand forced. I would have taken Joeckel over a Deion Jordan or an Ezekiel Ansah for the Jacksonville Jaguars, so I'm not going to shit on him for this pick. What did surprise me, though, was that for the rest of this draft, the remaining 7 picks that they have, 5 of them were spent on the secondary. I realize their secondary had gaping holes all over the place, but they spent 5 picks on the secondary. With all those holes that they have on offense, they spent a couple of picks on receivers, but they didn't spend a single pick on a running back, didn't spend a single pick on a quarterback, didn't spend a single pick on a tight end. Didn't spend any more picks other than the number 2 pick on any other offensive lineman. I was really surprised for a team whose offense is boo-boo. They didn't really pay the whole lot of attention. For a team whose defense was boo-boo, they focused primarily just on one position. Now, yes, this is also a team that spent a lot of high draft picks over the past several years on defensive linemen, but they've kept missing on defensive linemen. I was very surprised by the draft philosophy here. I like the selection of Cyprien in the 2nd round, except for the fact I think this organization should have taken Geno Smith with that 1st pick in the 2nd round. I really do. And especially in the 4th round, when it came time for the 4th round, they should have been taking Matt Barkley. The bottom line is Blaine Gabbert sucks. But if you want to go with Blaine Gabbert for one more year because you did spend a top 10 pick on him back in 2011, that's one thing. But bring in some competition. And no, not Chad Henne. Bring in a young guy. because maybe potentially that young guy pushes Blaine Gabbert and he has a good year, or Blaine Gabbert sucks again because Blaine Gabbert does indeed suck, and you find your next guy in the wings. I gave the Jaguars a C draft. I didn't like the fact that they focused so much on defensive backs. I didn't like the fact that they ignored other positions on the offensive side of the football, and I really didn't like the fact that they passed on the chance to take Geno Smith in the second round and Matt Barkley in the fourth round. I think that's a decision that this organization could potentially regret in years to come. Most importantly of all, I think the Jaguars really failed ultimately to come up with an identity as a football team out of this draft. Last but not least, because I think they're the team that ultimately helped themselves the most in the AFC South in this year's NFL draft, we get to the Tennessee Titans. I understand that some people and NFL scouts and executives, a lot of them are very adverse to taking offensive guards in the first round, and in particular in the top 10. This was a weaker draft. You were looking at, some teams were looking at safe picks that could help their offenses, and guys like Cooper and Warmack were there. So they felt it was right to take them. The Titans taking Chance Warmack at number 10 was only a bit surprising to me in the sense that they had already signed Levitra to a big free agent contract, so I was surprised that they invested a top 10 pick in a guard. I really was. However, when you look at this selection and then trading up a few slots in round number 2 to get Justin Hunter out of Tennessee, they've surrounded Jake Locker with help. They knew their offensive line was trash last year, both in pass protection, in particular in run blocking. They've addressed those problems on the interior of their line, in my opinion. So you're helping Jake Locker there, both in the running game and in the passing game. And then you bring in another weapon for him in the passing game like a Justin Hunter, a very talented player who has number 1 wide receiver potential written all over him. If you got Kenny Britt, keeps his head out of his ass at some point in time. You got Kendall Wright in the slot. That's potentially a very good wide receiver trio there in Tennessee. I like their selection of Wilson from UConn in the 3rd round. This, you could argue, were 3 instances for the Titans and the way their draft board would be set up based off of needs, etc. You got 3 players who, in each round, were the best player available at a position of need, which is how you should do a draft. And I take my hat off to the Tennessee Titans. You got guys like Gooden and Schwenke and Edwards. These are guys that could potentially contribute in as role players. Maybe a guy like Schwenke could start some point as center. Those guys will help determine whether this was just a good draft for the Tennessee Titans or a really damn good draft for this Tennessee Titan team. I like what they did here. They put some pressure on Jake Locker by also helping him and putting him in a better situation and giving him more chances to succeed because they gave him help. That's how you build around a young quarterback. So I gave the Titans a grade of a B, a very solid B. I really like what they did. And in general, I don't have a ton of complaints about the AFC South and what they did in the draft. I know I wasn't ragingly huge about what the Jaguars did, and I didn't think the Colts had the best draft. But I don't think any of these teams really hurt themselves all that much this year. And I think all of them in their own ways found some players that are going to be able to come in and contribute in this 2013 season. Next up, I will be talking about the last division in the AFC, the AFC West.